There's a vast array of other psychological assessments out there. For instance, if someone's role involves delivering mental health services, their own mental well-being might be assessed. There are tools, especially in clinical psychology, that focus on traits seen as problematic in the DSM. Furthermore, measures for depression, anxiety, or stress might be relevant for specific roles and thus form part of the evaluation process. But again, these should only be used if what you're measuring is likely to affect someone's ability to do the job. You might have heard of emotional intelligence. Well, they have tests to capture that. For example, the Mesquite. That said, the jury's still out on how valid these tests are. You might have taken the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator before. While popular, it's not the gold standard for gauging interests. If you've ever been labeled an INTJ and thought it decided your career path, you might want to think again. Despite its widespread use, more reliable tests are available that offer deeper insights into one's professional inclinations. A growing trend is integrity testing, zeroing in on a person's workplace ethics and values, which are vital in certain roles. But, as you can imagine, these tests are quite vulnerable to impression management, or faking. And more recently in the field of personality, the Hexaco model of personality has introduced an additional facet to the Big Five: honesty and humility. This zeroes in on ethics and moral values, a factor which is shown to be independent to the other 5 factors. Let's talk about interviews. Interviews are a widely favored selection tool. Their intuitive nature makes them popular, and sometimes they come paired with realistic job previews. Whether it's a panel of interviewers or one-on-one, there are primarily 2 kinds: unstructured and structured. In an unstructured interview, it feels more like a casual chat, but the structured ones are different. These follow a set protocol with specific questions and even rating scales. And there are different types of questions that can be asked, from ones probing past behavior to those examining responses to specific situations. And structured interviews tend to have higher validity when it comes to predicting job performance compared to unstructured interviews. This is because the questions are often based on a thorough job analysis, ensuring all candidates are asked the same questions, and also ensuring that the questions are directly related to the job. There's also some really interesting research that suggests that some applicants who are going for lots of jobs in the market can rehearse more generic answers. And having a more structured interview can actually mitigate the effect of these well-rehearsed applicants, so you get more genuine responses. These arguments are supported by a big meta-analysis from 2014, which showed that structured interviews not only aid in diminishing biases, addressing ethical concerns, but also further undercut these sorts of impression management issues. Just like we discussed with personality testing, when it comes to fairness, ethics, and biases in job interviews, it's important that the questions posed, whether in a structured or unstructured format, directly relate to the job requirements. So if it's necessary to discuss personal circumstances, this should be done in a neutral manner that's equally applicable to all applicants, and they shouldn't make or break the decision to offer someone a job. However, there are topics that should remain off limits during interviews, and encountering such questions could signal a deeper concern about the company's values and ethos. It's worth noting that there are rare exceptions, like roles in religious leadership or jobs that necessitate background checks, like positions involving children. But in general, an interview should focus on capability and fit, steering clear of potentially discriminatory or irrelevant questions. Another widely used method in the recruitment process is the assessment center. This is a multi-method selection tool that may involve cognitive ability or personality tests, but the hallmark of assessment centers is the suite of custom-built tests the organization employs to observe genuine behaviors in candidates. For instance, during work sample exercises or simulations, multiple observers and raters usually assess candidates against set selection criteria. For example, a bank might use a simulation to test the potential employee's ability to handle a difficult client while still adhering to bank policies. Such tests are tailor-made for specific job roles. This makes them expensive to design, so they're thoroughly validated to ensure their validity. At assessment centers, you might encounter leaderless group activities, where groups of candidates need to work together to solve a problem. You might have in-basket techniques, where candidates deal with specific office tasks and challenges as they arise. Or simulations. This could involve role plays, situational exercises, or hands-on tasks like performing a particular analysis or executing a customer transaction. There might be case analyses or business games. This is predominantly seen for managerial roles. These exercises mirror relevant job tasks. In some unconventional cases, you might find seemingly unrelated tasks. For example, retail job candidates might be tasked with solving a murder mystery in a leaderless group setting. These sorts of exercises aim to level the field, not favoring any prior experience, but gauging universal skills like teamwork, decision-making, and interpersonal prowess. The work sample test is usually administered as part of an assessment center. Suppose you're looking to hire a chef. Instead of just getting them to talk about their favorite recipes, you might ask them to prepare a signature dish, right on the spot. That's a work sample test. It's all about getting a direct window into an applicant's potential job performance. As you can imagine, work samples have good criterion validity and good face validity. They're also useful for providing the applicant with a realistic preview of the job. However, as with any tool, there are challenges to consider. Designing these tests requires both time and resources because they need to be carefully designed to mirror specific job roles and industries. Another thing to consider, what about internal candidates familiar with the job's nuances? They may have an unattended advantage, so you need to take steps to avoid bias. Here's a summary of the findings of the Schmidt and Hunter meta-analysis of meta-analyses examining the relationship between selection tools and performance. This is 85 years of research condensed into one figure. So what are the key takeaways? At the top, we have general mental ability. Regardless of the job's complexity, be it managerial or semi-skilled, it's consistently predictive of performance. Next, we see the integrity test and high marks on conscientiousness. Their predictability scores hover in the 0.3 to 0.4 range, which is moderate but definitely noteworthy. Assessment centers are also notable players in this space. However, a word of caution on interviews. As we discussed before, structured ones tend to outperform their unstructured ones. Now for the hands-on tests like job knowledge and work samples, their predictability is high because it's clear-cut. You're testing the exact skills required for the job. Interestingly, peer ratings also shine bright here, even if they're not always the first tools that organizations turn to. On the other side of the spectrum, we find criteria like age, work experience, and they even tested graphology, which is the analysis of someone's handwriting. Their correlation with job performance is not as robust. As the recruitment and selection world evolves, we're seeing gamification make a significant mark on selection tools. An intriguing study by Baumert and colleagues used economic games, introducing decision-making elements where participants choose compensation strategies, dealt with rejections, and enforced punishments. Picture a game scenario where applicants are in a position to decide bonuses, handle conflicts, or even address underperforming team members. What's fascinating about this study is that participants' in-game behaviors gave insight into their real-world dispositions, particularly with respect to altruism and fairness. The correlation between these in-game behaviors and traditional self-reported scales was strikingly high. This seems to suggest that gamified tools have solid psychometric properties. For those of you interested in the Masters of Organizational Psychology program, some of our students do placements at a company which specializes in gamified selection tools. To summarize the key elements of an optimal employee selection system, first, these systems have to be reliable. Every time you use the system, it should give you consistent results. It should also be valid. It should be grounded in a proper job analysis ensuring content validity. And it should predict work-related behavior. It should have criterion validity. Combining different assessment tools can also help improve validity. This can help offset each test's limitations. We also want to steer clear of any potential legal challenges. Again, an optimal selection system is face valid, meaning it should look like it's measuring what it claims to. Additionally, the system should respect boundaries, not invading privacy, never intentionally discriminating, and always working to minimize any adverse impact on applicants. Lastly, we need to consider cost. A system has to be cost-effective in terms of the cost to purchase or create the system, to administer it, and finally to analyze the results. What are some emerging issues in the world of personnel selection? One question is who can use or administer these tests? Should it be registered psychologists, or can people be trained to use them? There are privacy issues around the information that's collected that have to be considered. There are other issues around changing demographics and whether the norms that we use are appropriate. We're also concerned about applicant reactions to testing and how that affects their socialization process as they head into the job. There are also changing notions of what constitutes job performance. We're now looking beyond mere proficiency, valuing what's termed contextual performance. This emphasizes recognizing those who take initiative or demonstrate good citizenship as well. And with people more and more working in teams, we're also interested in the contribution to broader organizational outcomes and how we can evaluate that. Lastly, the rise of technology in this space, with methods like gamification, apps, and online testing, brings in a new dimension to this space. Related to the practices of personnel recruitment and selection is performance appraisal. Often methods and scales developed during selection and recruitment are repurposed to monitor and assess employee performance over time once they're within the organization. The performance appraisal process might quantify outputs like sales volume or rely on qualitative, more subjective assessments such as supervisor ratings. Regardless of the approach, the emphasis should be on ensuring fairness, producing equitable results. A widely used technique in performance appraisal is what's called 360-degree feedback, where the employee is appraised by their supervisor, so feedback coming from above, their peer, where feedback comes from the side, so to speak, and subordinates, where feedback comes from below. For example, consider a department manager in a retail store. They might receive feedback from the store director, supervisor feedback, other department managers, so peer feedback, and sales associates within their department, so that's the subordinate feedback. This holistic approach provides a comprehensive understanding of the manager's leadership style, their effectiveness, and areas for improvement. This is particularly common in leadership development, but also serves as a broader evaluation tool. For the appraisal process to be meaningful, clear performance indicators are critical. These should be derived from job analyses and offer clarity on job expectations. For instance, a clear objective for a retail manager might be increase department sales by 10% over the next quarter, whereas a vague objective could be improve sales performance. It's essential that objectives aren't vague, otherwise it's hard to gauge whether these objectives are met. The reason that these need to be clear is because if an employee is not performing to this standard that's expected, then there might need to be a performance management process where measures are put in place to help that employee get back on track. Ideally, the performance management process is proactive, identifying potential issues early on and offering coaching to address any deficiencies. This coaching might involve setting more realistic targets, suggesting better work routines, scheduling periodic check-ins, reinforcing the employee's strengths to build efficacy, or giving them a buddy who can demonstrate and role model good performance. So maybe you'd have an annual or 6-monthly or every 3-monthly review where a supervisor provides general performance, discussing goals, and how they can make improvements. And if the goals are not met and the coaching is not working, then the organization considers a performance management process. What are some key elements of a good performance appraisal process? One is robust assessment of performance indicators. Using multiple performance metrics, for example, sales, customer service ratings, etc., ensures a comprehensive evaluation of performance. Just like in the selection process, these metrics should demonstrate both reliability and validity. It's also important to train the appraisers. Ideally, those appraising performance should be trained to ensure unbiased and accurate evaluations. It's also useful to have multiple evaluations, drawing insights from various people, such as the multiple supervisors, peer appraisals, and self-appraisals can strengthen the evaluation process. Also critical is appraisal accountability. Those conducting appraisals should be assessed on their ability to provide objective evaluations. Regular and more frequent appraisals can be better for providing timely feedback, facilitating continuous improvement. Alternatives like performance dashboards can offer real-time feedback. Performance appraisals should also have a dual purpose. Besides aiding HR decisions around, say, promotions, appraisals should also serve as feedback tools for employees to understand their strengths and areas for growth. A final element is continuous review and revision. As job requirements evolve, so should the appraisal system, ensuring it remains relevant and effective. As we wrap up our lecture on recruitment and selection, let's recap what we've explored. We started off discussing what recruitment and selection are and how IO psychologists can help, particularly with selection. Remember, this isn't just about hiring. It's about ensuring the right fit for both the individual and the organization, and making sure that the process isn't just effective, but also fair. We then explored two critical components of a good selection tool: reliability and validity. And we delved into a range of selection tools at our disposal, from cognitive tests that gauge a candidate's thinking abilities to in-depth assessment centers that holistically evaluate a candidate's fit. And finally, we touched on performance appraisal, which is more than just a yearly review. It's about ongoing feedback, guiding employees towards growth and supporting vital HR decisions. Today's discussion highlights the importance of a carefully designed selection process and the role that it plays in helping achieve more positive outcomes for individuals and for organizations. That's all for today. I'll see you all in the lecture debrief.